All right. We are live on Facebook. We are live in a webinar function. We have a lot of guests who have joined us. Good evening, everybody. I'm Erin Maye Quade. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the advocacy at Gender Justice, and joining me as always.
I'm Jess Braverman. I use any pronoun, and I'm the legal director at Gender Justice. And before I came to Gender Justice, I was a public defender for 10 years. The first 6 of those was representing kids in family court in Brooklyn, New York, in what you call in Minnesota CHIPS cases. That's not what we called it there, but cases involving child abuse, child neglect, that sort of thing, or delinquency where they're charged with crime. So I do have a background in they call it the child protective field, though sometimes it certainly doesn't always feel very child protective.
Well, and tonight we're going to unpack Texas's attack on trans youth. And I think first, even just before we go into the background of kind of like what's been happening in Texas, I think we should just give like what happened this week. So this week on Monday, Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, released an opinion that said that gender-affirming care is child abuse. This is a non-binding opinion. I want to be very clear about that. And so do all of the groups in Texas. So it's not legally binding. That opinion itself has no legal effect and does not change Texas law. What happened next was that the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, issued a directive to government agencies, including Department of Family and Protective Services, instructing them to investigate all of these cases of child abuse, and I'm putting this in quotations. And that is kind of how we got to this place. So it's very scary for folks on the ground in Texas. Certainly a marked escalation on the attack on trans and LGBT youth. And so just want to give a lot of space to parents of trans kids, trans people who are in Minnesota or have loved ones in Texas. I mean, this is really scary. And if it feels scary, it's because it is. Just did I miss anything in just a brief what happened this week?
No, that's the gist of it.
So then let's back up and just like contextualize what happened in Texas and talk a little bit about the background. And you have a part of 2019 you want to start at.
Yeah. And so really the background of what happened here, you can trace it like even further back to like the bathroom bills in North Carolina, right? Like there've been attacks on trans people and attacks on trans kids for a while. We've seen a severe uptick in legislative attacks against trans kids, particularly 2020 and 2021 were really bad years for that. But going back to 2019, which is the same year that Idaho passed the trans sports ban. So it was when you kind of saw a big surge in state legislatures around the country and anti-trans youth related bills. There was this custody case in Texas where these parents were divorced and you had one parent who was super supportive of their trans kid and one parent who was not. So the father was not, the mother was supportive. You don't normally see like the attorney general, the governor, and a senator from a state get involved in a private custody matter, but they all did because the father went on basically a media tour. He accused the mother of forcing the kid to undergo transitions and this is not the language he even, he obviously he used different language than that, but he basically accused the mother of like abusing the child through like her being supportive of the child's like affirming the child's gender. The child asked to use a name that aligned with her gender and wear clothes that aligned with her gender, and the mother was on board with that and was supporting her. The child was not, I think, yet on any sort of like hormones or HRT or anything like that, but the mother was considering it, and the father sued in court to stop her from doing that, and it went to a jury trial and she won. Like the jury ruled against the father and for the mother. And after that happened, for some reason, the governor, the attorney general, all these like lawmakers, the government of Texas stepped in and was like, I don't care that a jury, ruled against the father. The Department of Family and Child Services, like, you have to go investigate this because supporting a kid like any gender affirming care is child abuse. Aside from surgeries done on infants with intersex variations, which is a whole other situation where, you know, you have surgeries done on children with intersex variations, and a lot of people in the community are saying, like, you have to stop doing this, it's a non-consensual surgery. And so basically they came out with all these opinions about this, and so that was where it kind of started. But like I said, this is an offshoot of like, you know, broader attacks on trans people, on trans youth. So I don't want to be like, this is where it started in that sense, but it's not like all of a sudden the governor of Texas was interested in this. Like, he was already meddling in like private custody proceedings.
Yes, and then there was a bill in 2021 in the Texas legislature that would have banned gender affirming care for minors. But the legislator who was leading that, who was going to run for attorney general, and I think it's important to just note that this, like, trying to out hate has become part of the political agenda and part of the political calculus in Texas, where they have I think a primary starting on March 1st, and so it's, you know, the timing of this is not random. And the legislator who tried to push this ban on gender affirming care for minors in 2021 was going to run for attorney general. So it is widely understood that part of Ken Paxton's calculus here was to ward off a challenger. But this legislator did not gain enough support for the bill, and so went to the attorney general to get this opinion, right? So it was kind of an end run around their legislature. I do think it's important. I think everyone who's probably watching and who's probably present in this webinar knows, but every major medical association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all of, you know, just like wide consensus, gender affirming treatment for trans youth is they are supportive of this. Extensive research shows time and time again that healthcare dramatically improves minors' mental health and their overall well-being. And so I just, you know, part of what is scary about this conversation is that, like, this is starting to equate support and healthcare for minors with child abuse. And I just am so nervous about this road that we're winding down as we start, like, strengthening the neural pathways in people's brains between supporting your trans kids and child abuse. But I do want to just say that it is the most loving thing a parent could be doing for their trans child is providing them with a safe, supportive home and access to healthcare. And, you know, that's the normal stuff that we all want parents to do for their kids. So I just want to make sure that is stated. So Jess, let's talk about what is, and well, actually, let's actually talk a little bit more about this directive from the governor, because in addition to directing the Department of Family and Protective Services to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any instances of abuse reported to the state, he also ordered a whole bunch of other people who are in contact with children to be mandatory reporters if they believe a child is receiving gender affirming care.
Well, kind of. So in basically there were more memos that kind of got bandied around. That unfortunately the head of the Department of Family and Protective Services in Texas agreed with Paxton and Abbott on their interpretation. None of them are judges, and so we're going to talk about this. Like, when we say it's not binding, we're going to talk about what we mean by that. But the Department of Family and Protective Services in Texas agreed with Abbott and Paxton. And so you ended up with Abbott, who's the governor, Paxton is the attorney general. So what you ended up with is Paxton writes this like additional letter laying out all of the reasons that he believes that providing gender affirming care for youth falls under Texas's definition in family law of child abuse. And then the governor says, well, in light of this, I expect DFPS to be like investigating these cases when they come up. Texas, like all states, Texas has mandatory reporters. And so in Texas, there's one rule that says like basically everyone has to report child abuse. There's a second rule that's like, if you're a professional, you're like a mandatory reporter. If you fail to report child abuse, it's a misdemeanor, but if you like cover up child abuse, it's a felony. And so what this is really going after, and that was already the law, But what the reason Abbott pointed that out is because what he's trying to scare the clinics, right, that provide gender affirming care. Like if you're a physician and your colleague provides gender affirming care, not only is the colleague doing this child abuse, but it's like you have to report the colleague. Otherwise you're committing a felony. And so it really is this kind of just like this, they're trying to, similar to SB8, which we can talk about, the anti-abortion law where there's bounty hunters who, you can get $10,000 if you report that someone had an abortion. It's kind of the similar thing of just inspiring fear in people, fear to like provide care. There is some like good news, I don't want to make this all doom and gloom. We're just trying to kind of start by explaining where things are at right now. And so that's basically where we landed. It's not quite I don't know if it's an executive order. It was just kind of a letter directing, as the governor directing an agency, which like, to do this. Basically not
usually a normal thing that governors do. They'll say, here's how the agencies should be conducting themselves here, whatever.
Yeah. The thing that's important to understand though is, so just a little bit about how CPS or Child Protective Services works is it's not up to the governor or the AG or even the head of DFPS, even the head of CPS in your state and your county to decide the ultimate interpretation of these laws, right? If there's an allegation of child abuse and the case goes in front of a court, the judge decides what is and isn't child abuse. So they didn't write into law, gender affirming care is child abuse. What they did was they said, I'm looking at this law and I believe gender affirming care fits in this definition of child abuse. And it's a separate question of whether a court would agree with that. And it's up to the judge. He does not listen to the governor. He does not have to listen to the attorney general. The judge decides how to interpret the law. And so this is not legislation. It's not like legislators wrote a law saying gender affirming care is child abuse. It's the governor saying, I'm looking at the child abuse law and it seems to me that gender affirming care falls under it. So it's not binding. How CPS works is, someone can claim that someone has committed child abuse. It's anonymous, right? So people can anonymously report on their neighbors. You may never find out who reported you for child abuse. And so someone reports child abuse. Some people are mandated reporters, like teachers, physicians, often social workers are mandated reporters. They have to report child abuse. And so CPS, Child Protective Services, gets the call, they investigate, and they decide, they could decide like, this is just unfounded. Like I see no evidence of child abuse based on like the laws, the handbooks, all the things I'm following that child abuse is going on, and they can close the case. They can say this needs further monitoring, or they can bring the case to court, right? At that point, they bring a claim in court saying, I suspect this family has committed child abuse, and you get, a hearing, you get a trial, a judge decides whether or not you've committed child abuse. In terms of removing kids from their home, having a CPS case is not the exact same thing as a kid automatic. It's not like you have a CPS case, someone reported you for abuse and your kid is immediately like removed from your home. There's other steps that have to happen. Usually you have to ask a judge for permission, like the government has to ask the judge for permission to remove a kid. If there's an extreme circumstance, like the kid's like in really imminent danger, you can, the government can remove a kid without having a court order first, but that's supposed to be really rare. It's supposed to be for like really imminent danger. And then you get a hearing like the next day. And so, what I'm trying to say is like, I think there's a lot of confusion over like, what does all of this mean? And I'm not sure if I've cleared it up or not, well, but oh, go ahead, Erin.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that's true in Texas too. I mean, we're certainly not experts in Texas DFPS, but I think even the experts there are like, we're unsure what this means. This does open up just a new world in which people are, but it's doing its intended effect, right? It's meant to scare people. It's meant to erase trans people from life or from society, and ultimately force them back into the closet. It's using schools and nurses and doctors and cutting them off from life-saving healthcare. I mean, that's the point.
And it's meant to make people who provide gender affirming care, similar to how they want to make abortion providers scared to provide abortion care, people who provide gender affirming care make them afraid of providing it, because if they provide it, they could be, looked at as, prosecuted for child abuse and then prosecuted for not reporting their colleagues. And so I think it's just, it's intended that people feel panic and fear. And that's exactly what this is intended to do, like instill that panic and fear and confusion and chaos. And it's scary. I don't want to downplay it. Sometimes something happens and people play it up and then you're like, well, you cried wolf. I mean,
Yeah.
there is some good news, which is that a number of district attorneys in various Texas counties said, we will not enforce this. Like, you families keep providing your gender affirming care to your kids, you providers keep providing the care. There's no way in hell we're enforcing this. And it's in big counties, which is good and bad, right? It means that those counties, there are a lot of people living in them, but if you're not in one of those counties, you're probably already having a bit of a hard time, and this is probably making your life a little harder.
And I think it should be said too, I think Texas has the second highest population of trans people in the country. That's true for adults and it's true for young people. So this isn't just a handful of kids, this is tens of thousands of kids. And they're talking about separating families, taking kids from loving home environments who are receiving medical care and operating on best practices and putting them into CPS, which, I mean, I don't know if folks have been paying attention, but in Texas is wildly overburdened and basically broken. Like, there have been lawsuits filed extremely recently for how kids are being treated in that system. And so I want to just really, be attuned to the fact that there are a lot of people who are scared and also aren't hearing like, oh, well, your county is not going to do it. Like, that's precious little comfort.
Right. And am I going to trust a prosecutor not to, like, how much am I going to trust that? I mean, it's scary. It's scary.
Yes.
I want to, and I don't want to, like, it's like, I don't want to rile people up and I don't want to downplay it. Like, there is process, there's the opportunity to be heard. This is not a law. It's the government's read on what a law means, which they don't get to say, like the court says it, not them. But I just, the thing about family court is the whole purpose of it is to act in a child's best interest, right? Like, at the end of the day, everything done in family court, like, because as someone who practiced in family court, like, everything at the end of the day came down to that, right? And so I want to just talk about, like, what does this do, right? Like, what if you have a kid who is having like a medical emergency and needs to go to the emergency room, like, and the COVID. Family, or COVID or whatever, and the family's like, well, if I take you to the emergency room, we have mandated reporters there who are going to figure out that you're on gender affirming care, right? Like, I mean, this is not in any kid's best interest. Right. Or you have like the custody case, right? Like, you have a violent or abusive or neglectful parent who says, like, look, if you leave me, I'm going to tell the government that you're supporting our trans kid, and they're going to take the kid away. I mean, it's really the things we do in the name of like the children's best interest is already bad, and this is just like cruel. It's just cruel.
So and I see if you have questions and you're in this webinar, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A function. If you're on Facebook, feel free to pop them in the comments. But I want to just connect what's happening in Texas to things that are happening across the country and here in Minnesota, because what I don't want folks in this room, this space, to feel like, oh, that's so far away and that's happening in other places and not here, because it is happening here in Minnesota. It's just happening a little bit differently. So we know that the bathroom bills, the anti-trans youth and sports bills, even some of these bills that that we've been seeing about, controlling what happens in schools, are really about making sure that the government can control parents and bodies and essentially move. They want to make it like, they want to forbid a child from being trans, from learning about trans people, for facing they want to protect kids from facing consequences for bullying and discriminating against trans and LGBT peers. And so, there was a bill that was heard last week and this week in the Minnesota Senate. It's Senate File 2509, that on its face, if I sent you the language and you looked at it, you would read it and you would say, I don't understand how this bill could be part of this. But it was in the testimony in support of this bill, Senate File 2909, that made it very clear that the goal of the bill is to attack gender inclusive policies in schools, attack trans kids who play on sports teams, remove consequences from students who bully or discriminate against trans and LGBT students. I mean, that was really what the testimony was in favor of. It was to do those things. And so there is not like a huge gap between the assertion that openness about LGBTQ issues is dangerous to kids to the mainstreaming of the idea that some Americans, based on who we are or who we affirm, are abusers, right? Or that kids should be removed from supportive homes or supportive classrooms. And so this narrative that is being constructed is being pushed in multiple different places in many different ways, but it's all meant to push the same narrative. It's wrong to be trans or LGBT. It's a violation of some students' rights not to be able to discriminate or bully their classmates, and that being around a trans or LGBT person is inherently sexual or dangerous or bad, and it is meant to perpetuate that narrative. And that bill is being pushed in the Senate. It's Senate File 2909. It's Senator Eichhorn's bill, and it could be up on the Minnesota Senate floor as early as next week. And the group that's pushing it is the Family Council. The folks who want to ban marriage equality and support conversion therapy and want to defund public schools is like a cornerstone of their piece. To your question, Erica, what are the prospects of Senate File 2909 passing? I think it very well could pass the Senate. I don't think it has a chance of passing or getting a hearing in the House. And I don't think there's a chance that Governor Walz would sign it. But what I do want to say is that when we met with the Department of Education last year to talk about trans inclusion in schools, they mentioned that every time there is a bill up somewhere in the country that talks about trans kids, the bullying and harassment of trans and LGBT students at schools goes way up, and they get calls to their hotline from parents and from students and from educators. So even if this bill doesn't pass, the fact that there was a bandied about the humanity of kids in schools, that automatically harms them already, and it is contributing to the harm. So again, it was Senate File 2909. It's Senator Eichhorn's bill. And it's already had 2 hearings and passed out of the Education Policy Committee and the Civil Law Committee.
I want to also talk about this like weird dystopia. It's like all these things are happening at the same time. So there's a question about how this is a move by conservative Christians and evangelicals. And let's just talk about all the different pieces for 1 second. So you have bills that are pushing parents' rights, right? And being pushed by the same people who are pushing bills to take kids away from parent, like to basically put the state in charge of people's kids. And so what's happening is really not about parents' rights. It's actually about like, we want kids to have like no privacy and autonomy. We want parents to have complete control over their kids. But if the parents aren't ideologically aligned with what we want, then we want the power of the state to step in and like beat them into submission. And I think that's really scary because some of this stuff is cloaked under the banner of parents' rights. But like, look at what they're doing here. They're trying to say like, you can't parent your kid if that's how you're going to do it. And so it's this really, but what it is at the end of the day is like the parents who are doing it the way we want, you have all the freedom in the world to do it. And anything that diverges from that, right? Like a kid getting privacy, a kid getting autonomy, a parent supporting their kid who's not doing what they want. That's when the state gets to step in and the state's interests outweigh the interest of the kid, the interest of the family. And it's very scary. Like there's this phrase like parents patria, where the state steps in as the parent for a kid. And it can become this very scary concept where like the state really just has an incredible amount of control over your life. And that's the goal.
And I think it's also meant to promote this illusion that parents don't have rights when they do. They already do. This is actually just in specific backlash to the safe and supportive learning environments that schools are working to create for all students. What certain legislators want and these special interest groups want is they want to attack trans and LGBT inclusion in schools and in societies. And that's why, the Family Council is the organization that's pushing this, is that they want to create a separate alternative system where policies of inclusion and safety don't apply to them, right? It's that some students have it and some students do not. And so that is what's really insidious about these bills, is that on their face, they seem fine, or they, talk about quote unquote parents' rights. This is absolutely not about that. This is about putting the government in control of certain people, that this very small minority of people do not agree with their existence.
And then how does this all square with the Fourth Amendment and privacy? I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. The federal right to privacy is like really under attack right now because it's the underpinnings for Roe v. Wade, like for abortion rights. And if you listen to the recent, for folks who are on Facebook, like not everyone knows. So I'm reading an audience question. How does this all square with the Fourth Amendment and privacy? So privacy rights at the federal level are under attack because it's basically the underpinning for Roe v. Wade and for abortion rights is like the constitutional right to privacy. And there are people who don't want there to be abortion rights. And they say, well, the word privacy isn't in the Constitution. There's a whole fight over like the constitutional right to privacy at the federal level. What is it? And does it even exist? And it's in an effort to end abortion rights because that's the underpinning for it. But, I do this is a huge invasion of people's privacy. It's like, we often think of this in terms of like parents, but like, think of the kid, right? Like a kid tends to know what's safe for them. Like, I'm not saying kids have like 100% the best judgment, but like, when it comes to like their own personal safety, they might think it's not safe to tell their parent they're gay or trans or whatever, because maybe it's not, right? Like maybe they're absolutely right. And when they find someone like at school that they can trust and they can talk to, the parents' rights bill, what one goal is that like the kid won't have that because everyone will have to tell the parent, hey, your kid told me they're gay. And it's like, as though the kid can't know for themselves, like who it's safe to talk to and like talk to people when they feel comfortable. And so I think this is a huge privacy violation, but I don't know how much people really value the privacy right of kids, and they should. And it's unfortunate. And you see it with like kids needing, in Minnesota, you need you need to notify both your parents before having an abortion if you're a minor, but you don't need to notify them about anything else pregnancy related. And so I don't think people take kids' right to privacy seriously enough, unfortunately.
If we think about it in the macro, right, like one basic general rule of humanity is that we don't out people, right? That is something that people choose to do on their own. There are plenty of adults in this world who are public figures who are gay that still don't get outed because they have chosen not to, come out themselves. That's something that still extends to young people too. They get to come out at a time and place of their choosing. And there is nothing about being a minor that takes that right away from them. They still get to have that for themselves and come out when they so desire or choose to. And that is, I think there's like this hysteria that's ginned up of like, well, if you don't know all the stuff about your kid and the school does, then, right? And it's like trying to create this world of terror, when in reality, it has always been best practice to let people come out at the time and place of their choosing, whether they're 18 or 15, right? So I think it's important to keep that in mind. What do you recommend as a counter narrative to this general conspiracy of trans kid phobia?
I think one thing we were talking about before is like, there's this thing where like bathrooms, sports, all this stuff people think of as like, I support trans people, I'll use someone's correct pronoun, but I'm not really comfortable with them in the bathroom or in the locker room or playing, I don't think a trans girl should be on a girls sports team. And these aren't like separate issues, right? Like, it's not like it's what Paxton and Abbott did would sound absolutely like, it does sound bonkers, but it would sound even more bonkers if it had happened outside the context of us constantly, relentlessly debating the right of trans people and trans kids to exist for the past few years, right? Like, it's the only thing that makes it like, how are we not like at war with this government right now? Like, it would like, imagine this in 2018, it would sound like like even more bananas. Like not just to us, but like probably to more people. But for years, all everyone's been hearing is like, you know, like trans women are like deceiving people and trying to play women's sports to get medals, and trans kids are like sexual deviants, and trans people are using bathrooms to commit sexual assaults, and it's like nonstop in every state house across the country. And when you think about it as a separate thing, like, I don't know how I feel about trans women in sport, like this is where you end up, like we need to like stop that. What they're doing, what the other side is doing, is a divide and conquer. Like, they want everyone to be fighting, like, cis women to say like, well, if a trans woman plays sports, I lose something, which, like, no, you don't. But like, they want you to feel that visceral feeling, so that by the time this happens, you're like, maybe it is like reasonable to, maybe trans people are going too far, maybe kids shouldn't be trans, it's trying to kind of normalize this transphobia, and it's so effective. And I think we need to not see this as like just a crazy thing that the government in Texas did with their CPS system, and see it as part of the broader assault on trans people's existence that we've been seeing just relentlessly, including in Minnesota, right?
Yes. And I'll say that part of what the counter narrative to this is to remind people of our shared values, right? We want all children to be safe and included in their learning environments. We want them to be protected so that they can learn and grow and thrive. We decided a long time ago that discrimination is not okay. And that is true now. It is true for kids. It's true for cisgender kids. It's true for transgender kids. It's true for LGBT kids. It's true for heterosexual kids, right? So I think leaning into our values of values for all, right? That we want all children to be safe and have thriving learning environments, kind of leaning into what we know to be true. I think sometimes bills like these or messages like these make us like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say, when in reality, it's like basic knowledge that we've all agreed on how we should treat each other and how we should certainly treat kids. We also know that this is the kind of messaging that works best, because one of the problems is that, a lot of people don't know a trans person. A lot of kids do. A lot of kids know other trans kids, so this is not a problem with children. Most of them are like asked, answered, settled. People are who they are. This is an adult problem. And so when you're targeting such a small population of people and using, terrible rhetoric and fear-mongering rhetoric, and then you're also including like terrible misinformation and disinformation related to your body and to sex and gender and biology and all of these things, people get really confused. And like, you don't have to know or understand what it's like to be trans. You don't have to know or understand what it's like to be an LGBT youth. All you have to know is that we actually already decided that discrimination is bad and wrong, and that we want schools to be inclusive places for all students to learn, grow, and thrive. So those are the places that we rest our messaging on, is to remind folks of why we have inclusive schools and safe learning environments, why we let kids play sports and why we want them to play sports, right? Those kinds of things.
And then we got a question. I'm transgender, legally female, and was asked to not use the women's locker room in my local swimming facility. I would put up a stink, but they went out of their way to provide a private dressing shower facility. With COVID, I'm okay with the privacy due to COVID. Am I wrong for not confronting this? There's two separate pieces to this. One is you have a right to use the women's locker room. And what happened to you is, it's not only wrong, like just it's wrong, like it's legally wrong and it should not have happened to you. But am I wrong for not confronting this? This isn't the same thing, but when I was sworn in as a lawyer back in like, I don't know, like 2009, 2010, I got physically grabbed and removed from the swearing in ceremony because they thought I was a boy without a tie, and ties were required by men, like by the dress code. And it was a violation of I was in New York. It was a violation of like the New York human rights law. Like you're not allowed to have these gender dress codes. It was clearly wrong. And I was being sworn in as a lawyer, and I never really like did anything with it because I had a lot going on and it was stressful. Like, it was a stressful thing that happened to me. It was stressful to think about. And it was supposed to be a really happy day. And I just like, I think like the question of like whether everyone has to take action when a wrong happens. Like, I think you have to live, I think you have to live your life, like if you want to take action, know that people will support, there's people who support you. There's people who think what happened to you is wrong and should not have happened. Whether you like have to put yourself and your body and your experience on the line in a really vulnerable way to like fight this, I think that's a decision you make. And there's not like a wrong, and it's not like no one's doing anything wrong by not doing that, because it's hard. It's a lot to ask. And there's many valid reasons to say, like, I pick a lot of fights, and this one, I just don't have the capacity for. So yeah, no, it's not wrong for not confronting this, but they were wrong for doing that to you.
Well said. I have nothing additional to add. We're coming up on almost 40 minutes. And so I want to be mindful of everyone's time, including my own and yours, Jess's. Are there any last questions before we wrap up for the evening? And we'll just wait a second. I do want everyone to know that part of what is happening right now is a backlash to increase supports for LGBTQ inclusion. It is what I'm hoping is the death rattle of this hateful behavior and these, attempts to excuse people for their hateful behavior. And so I know that it might not feel that way, but this is related to increased support for LGBTQ people and the LGBTQ community. The more visible we are, the more power we gain, the more, all of that. This is part of that. And so for all of you parents of trans kids, like, loving and supporting your kids is 100% the right thing to do. You are doing the right thing. You are amazing. Your kids are amazing. I was just on a call last night with someone who said being trans is awesome. And I was like, yes, being trans is awesome. And so I hope that there's, moments of joy that you're creating, because they absolutely deserve that.
What can people do? So there was a question, like, what can people in Minnesota do? And I know Gender Justice puts stuff out. You're the advocacy director, so this is your.
Yes. So, I would, one is understanding that this is not a weird, isolated event. And so I want you all to know that the people who are pushing these anti-trans policies, like, they are showing up at school board meetings, they're showing up at the legislature, or they're writing their school board members, they're writing their legislators. Even if you think that your legislator or school board member already knows, they need to hear from you. And so, like, taking the time to write a letter, you don't have to be saying, vote for this bill or sign on to this bill. You can say, like, I support and want trans inclusion in this community, in our schools, and I want you to do everything you can to promote that, whether that's through policy, through law, through action. Like, that's an ask you can make of people. There was, and I especially want to say for parents of cis kids, like, this is a great time to be learning from your kids, because it's likely that they're like, this is totally fine. Why are you freaking out? But also advocating for trans inclusive policies at, in their sports teams and in their extracurricular activities, and teaching your kids how to be, mindful and inclusive. And then the third, this was advice specifically from a mom of a trans boy in Texas who talked about creating a safe folder that includes things like documentation, so medical records and vaccination records and letters from principals and medals and certificates that they've won. I want to be really clear and say that, Minnesota is taking a different tack than Texas, but I think it would be a disservice to not lift up the voice of a parent of a trans kid in Texas on what she's doing to prepare. And so I will pop the link to that Twitter thread where she kind of lays out all of those things in the chat here. And then we can also put this on Facebook, just so that we're uplifting the voices who are being most effective, or most affected, excuse me. And then thank you, Yolanda, for reminding me there is going to be a rally in support of trans kids. It's going to be Sunday, March 6th at 1:30 p.m. at the Minnesota Capitol. The Facebook event will go up on Monday as we're confirming the whole thing, but show up at the rally. It'll be outside, masked and safe, with some really good speakers. So thank you for reminding me of that, Yolanda. All right, well, we will end here. Thank you for giving us your time this evening. We will be back. Jess and I will be back as things develop, as things happen. Make sure you sign up for our email list because we will help you get connected to your legislators to take action here in Minnesota, genderjustice.us. And we will see you all again soon. Have a good night. Bye, everybody.